Should Canadians be concerned about the rule of law in this country? No. The Globe and Mail article contains errors, unfounded speculation, and in some cases is simply defamatory. There was no inappropriate pressure put on the minister at any time. I am quite sure the minister felt pressure to get it right. Part of my conversation with her on December 19th was conveying context that there were a lot of people worried about what would happen.
Canada's top civil servant sharing some strong words with the Justice Committee today. Michael Wernick, the clerk of the Privy Council, says there was no unlawful or inappropriate pressure placed on Jody Wilson-Raybould. So what should we make of his testimony? Are we any closer, for instance, to understanding what actually happened? At issue back for the second time this week, Chantal Hébert returns, and she is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Shachi Kurl joins us from Vancouver tonight. Good to see everybody. We almost did a third at issue this week, I must admit, but I told them you might need a break. So it was pretty extraordinary to hear the clerk of the Privy Council give this, very adamant testimony about how things unfolded. Certainly added lots of details to the things that we had heard. Let me just get your first impressions, if I can, and I'll start with you, Chantal, on what was important to you in terms of what Wernick said.
Well, to start off with what maybe was not the most important, the Justice Committee did not turn into a partisan circus.
Yes.
And allowed people to speak out. What was new was that for once, someone with his face on what he was saying was speaking in complete sentences and answering questions. So that's new. It's not someone whispering or someone throwing a line in a scrum. I think what I took from it, the first thing is there are three people who spoke to Jody Wilson-Raybould in that adventure. The Prime Minister, Jerry Butts, and the clerk. And all three, you can expect now, are on the same page. They all felt that they were not crossing any lines in what they were doing, and yes, they did speak with her. That is also clear from testimony. And what I took, what makes Mr. Wernick different from the other two is that no longer can you say some political operator gone rogue on the orders of the Prime Minister crossed the line, because the clerk of the Privy Council's job is to tell the Prime Minister and Jerry Butts where the lines are.
Yes.
Yes. So if you feel that the Prime Minister and Jerry Butts crossed the line, then the top civil servant, backed with the advice of the civil service, also crossed that line.
Okay, so in terms of the counsel that he was giving, Andrew, because that's primarily his job, not only to sort of make sure they're governing properly, but also to give advice in order to help them implement their policy agenda. Do you view that as something that he should not have done, or something that Jody Wilson-Raybould could have interpreted as pressure?
Well, I guess what I came with is he's moving the line. Initially, we were talking about whether anybody was directed or not, and the Prime Minister, that was his line. Then, sotto voce, behind the scenes, people in the Prime Minister's office, unnamed, would say, well, we didn't put any pressure on her. He wouldn't say that, but they said it. We never put any pressure on her. Now we're hearing we didn't put inappropriate pressure on her. So we're moving closer and closer, it seems to me, to the point where you say, well, maybe we pressured her, but we were okay in doing so because we had these important objectives we wanted to achieve. So we're moving the line from what was previously unimaginable and quite improper to, well, it's maybe a gray area, maybe not so improper. I also found a lot of his testimony strange. That statement off the top when he talked about, people are going to get shot in campaigns and a bunch of stuff that was not germane to this issue whatsoever. And some of the commentary, frankly, sounded like he was cheerleading for the government. So it was an odd day and an odd performance all round. But look, he's also one of the people that Jody Wilson-Raybould, it seems, is going to suggest had inappropriately pressured her. So yeah, he clearly was contradicting that.
What did you take from it, Shachi?
Oh, it's unprecedented. So first of all, the idea of the clerk of the Privy Council, this is supposed to be this eminence grise in background, having difficult and maybe testy or four-letter word conversations in background. It's not supposed to come out in public. And so to hear Mr. Wernick swinging for the fences today really did catch my eye. The other piece of it, though, is that, a lot of what he was saying, a lot of it of what Mr. Lametti was talking about, if you just looked at it sort of in a vacuum, oh yes, it could be seen as very reasonable. We didn't mean to pressure. The intent wasn't to pressure. We can't speak to what Jody Wilson-Raybould took away from those conversations. The intent wasn't there. But of course, that doesn't explain why she was dropped from cabinet. So that is the piece that sticks with me, and the circle that doesn't square. And I think that is what a lot of people who are watching this from outside the Beltway are taking away, which is, okay, all of the recasting of the tone and the tenor of these three conversations may go some way to appear to smooth things over, but of course, at the end of the day, this is very much about the appearance of a raw exercise of power. You didn't do what we wanted, Jody Wilson-Raybould, you're out. And we don't have a good explanation for why.
Chantal, then Andrew. Chantal, then Andrew.
But it also opens up a question that I personally have had since the beginning. And I think anyone who is on principle left a job to resist pressure to one's independence would understand why that question would be there. If you feel you're unduly pressured, why would you not resign? And if you feel that you are confirmed in your suspicion, if it's only a suspicion by being offered a demotion, why would you not resign? Why would you do nothing about it and question if the Globe and Mail hadn't come out with a story based on anonymous sources, would Ms. Wilson-Raybould still be the Minister of Veterans Affairs?
Andrew.
Those are certainly questions worth answering. Another question is why, if you can understand if there was maybe a misinterpretation, people had different ideas about what was intended.
Right.
Maybe she gets that mistaken impression at the time.
Right.
Why would she still have that impression today and have that impression so strongly it appears that she was willing to resign from cabinet over it? That doesn't seem to me to add up. That if once you've explained to her, listen, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, that's not what we intended at all.
Yeah.
If she's not taking that as sincere, there's probably worth finding out why.
Well, and it does seem like she had to be reassured on that point multiple times by the Prime Minister, the clerk, and others that the decision was hers. And so, to your point, why by reassured? Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she did take the decision, and then feels certainly, I guess, that she took a hit for it.
So it sounds like she had weeks of meetings in which people were laying on, quote unquote, appropriate pressure on her. And there's real questions as to whether any of those conversations should really have happened. People keep invoking the quote-unquote Shawcross doctrine, which is that the Attorney General can go and solicit advice from her cabinet colleagues. That's a very different thing than the Prime Minister calling her in or sending Jerry Butts to meet her or sending Michael Wernick to meet her. Those are very different types of situations.
Yeah, except we also found out today that those meetings, the Prime Minister meeting, the clerk meeting, were actually about different issues where there was already a problem between.
Sure. My point is unsolicited advice.
Fine, okay.
Is a very different thing than solicited advice.
Okay. I want to play the clip of Jody Wilson-Raybould though, so that we can talk a little bit more about her. But I think it's important to play this clip again because it left me with a lot of questions again yesterday about where we are. So here's what she said yesterday in the House.
I understand fully that Canadians want to know the truth and want transparency. Privilege and confidentiality are not mine to waive, and I hope that I have the opportunity to speak my truth.
I mean, that went off like, everyone was stunned by that. What do we take from that? I'll start with you, Shachi, and then go through everybody.
Well, it says to me, and I think Canadians take from it, and we've seen from 2 out of 3 polls released this week, that they are not entirely satisfied with whatever explanations are being proffered, and that there is more to come, or there is a sense of we're not quite there yet. So there's like the stink factor, and then there's the stick factor. The stink factor is what the Liberal government, despite sort of using all the air freshener in the can this week, have not been able to make go away. The next question is, how long does this last? And we have seen over the last 3 days a steady drip, drip, drip of everything's fine, oh, bombshell. Everything's okay, new information, new allegations, new things coming out. So clearly, Jody Wilson-Raybould has a truth to tell. That truth does not look like it bodes well or augurs well for this Liberal government, because at the end of the day, she still appears to be at odds with whatever happened, whether it was legal or over a line or under a line. And again, I take 10 steps back and say, well, okay, what do voters in an election year take away from this? And they take away from the fact that, look, this is a government that campaigned on being clean and doing government differently and more respectfully and more transparently. And they can't see. They don't see that right now. It's not on brand.
Yes, well, voters, the expression "my truth," I think today is clearer than it was even yesterday. Voters are going to have to choose between the word of the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and Jerry Butts versus hers, clearly. Her version is not going to match theirs, and theirs are going to be similar. And voters will have to judge. I'm not sure that the test of truth is that she says the same thing as they do or that they say as she does. I don't think it's that clear. And I think by now she's well aware that her perception is not going to be confirmed by any of the other players in those exchanges.
Or even worse, Andrew, she goes in next week and she tells pretty much the same version of events, but it's through her lens where she feels she's been pressured. And then I don't know how you figure out what happened if it's a very similar version, because it's just one person's view of it, is it not?
First thing to point out is that when she came out of that cabinet meeting, there was a lot of talk was there'd been some rapprochement. Now, well, that's clearly not the case. We've since learned that they made her wait for 2 hours before they allowed her in. That when she was in there, she did tell them that she felt she'd been inappropriately pressured. And then the cabinet, having heard that, then trotted out and voted against having a public inquiry into this. So that implicates a lot more than just Jerry Butts and the Prime Minister. We now have cabinet ministers who know what she knows, or what she's told them she knows, and have acted as they have acted. I do think even if it's, frankly, even if it's on Michael Wernick's account, when you work through what they were asking her to do, so was she going to go and direct the Director of Public Prosecutions to drop the charges against SNC-Lavalin on grounds of the economic impact it would do? That's actually not allowed under the law. And there's several reasons to think that SNC-Lavalin was actually not eligible for that special treatment. So I don't think people have kind of worked through exactly how many steps would have to fall into place for this simple act, supposedly, of asking the Attorney General to intervene, for that actually to translate into anything that SNC-Lavalin or the government actually wanted to happen here. I don't think they fully thought this through, frankly.
Chantal, what's in again? Yeah.
Just one word. I am not concluding that people vote against the public inquiry, or that the debate over whether a public inquiry is one necessary and be the appropriate vehicle based on what they heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould at the cabinet meeting. There are a host of reasons to think long and hard before setting up public inquiries.
I gotta go. I'm gathering we're going to talk about this some more, so don't fear not. Before we go, though, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week we're talking about the other story that rolled through Ottawa this week. Probably didn't get the attention that it would have normally, but the convoy. So look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.